Hello, everyone. I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. Now, when I speak, my topic is something that I call Take the Doughnut, which is another way for me to say Carpe Diem, go after what you want in life. And what I wanted to do this year was rewatch Halt and Catch Fire, but this time talk about it with other people. And we're up leveling this now because I'm getting a chance to talk with people who actually worked on this show. And before I introduce my guest for today, I just wanted to give a quick housekeeping item. So, if you're brand new to the show Halt and Catch Fire, the episode recaps are safe for you up until the episode that you're on. They are spoiler free, but the interviews could be spoiler filled. We could mention any detail from any episode of the show here. So, just know that before you jump in. And having said all of that, I'm so excited to welcome my guest for today, who is Glenn Brown. Now, hopefully I'll get this right. In one listing, I've seen you listed as the camera operator for 40 episodes. You did additional photography for seasons 3 and 4. You were the Steadicam operator for season 2. I've also seen it listed for you that you did ACAM, Steadicam operator, and second unit DP. So can you break this down for me? What was your role for somebody who doesn't have a lot of technical knowledge? Tell us more about what you did for the show.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, I was the A camera Steadicam operator. So, like the primary camera operator, and I also did Steadicam, which, some people don't know, like you wear a Steadicam and an arm, and it keeps it smooth when you walk. And that was like my primary role the first 2 seasons. And then season 3, we had another person, Steve Campbell, who was the B camera operator. So like when one DP would prep or be gone, he would shoot. And then he left. So then the last 2 seasons, seasons 3 and 4, I took over that role. So I was the A camera, Steadicam operator still. But when the other DP would go away, I would shoot, I would be the director of photography for those days. Usually it was like anywhere from 1 to 2 days an episode. And one episode I did like 4 days, depending, so it was, that kind of changed, depending on what episode we were doing.
Okay, this is really helpful to know. So if we back up a second, how did
Sure.
this role come to you? How did you get connected with Halt and Catch Fire to begin with?
The key grip was a friend of mine had recommended me to Nelson Craig, who was the first cameraman, and then the UPM, who was Steph Aceta, who was like Jeff Freilight's UPM. We had done a movie called The Collection together in 2010, so she knew me already. And then I did The Walking Dead, and she had done The Walking Dead, so we had known each other. Hadn't met Jeff yet until that show, but I had known Steph, so I knew those two people on the show already.
It sounds like it's pretty typical for it to be a really networked group where you kind of know people, but also like The Walking Dead was another AMC show, another Atlanta show. So is it more connected within a city, or is it connected industry wide for you?
I mean, it's more connected like with the people you work with,
Mhm.
like, and then like I was living in Atlanta at the time, and I still am living in Atlanta, and there was only so many people that were even available to do the show, so like it's a small finite number of people, and I'd already been on an AMC show, and then like I'd already worked with the production manager, and so like it's like there was only one other person that could have done the job, and he was busy, so it just kind of I fell into it.
Yeah, that's amazing. So when you given that you wore a few different hats,
Yeah.
who do you interface with the most on set when you're doing your various jobs that you're doing?
I mean, most of the time, the show slowly evolved, right? So, and I was like the one constant the whole time. So in the beginning, like Nelson was the cameraman, and like he wasn't big into operating, so like I would mostly interface with the director and the actors and a little bit with the cameraman, like so that's like 90% of the time, because the director's like, we work out what the shot's going to be, and then we tell we help the director does the blocking with the actors, and then like that's how the scenes are shot. So like that's how like my typical job would be. And then Nelson would like he would have a little bit of say, but like he wasn't much of doesn't big into camera operating, so it wasn't like he and I didn't have a big like talking point, because some cameramen, they're like, this is what they're more involved in what talking to the director and, you know, the look of the show, but that's just not how it worked from the start of the show.
Mm. What would a day look like for you on set? Take us through. I know that it probably evolved quite a lot over the 4 seasons, but what would
Yeah.
a typical day look like for you?
I mean, usually, you know, we get there in the morning and then, you know, you rehearse with the actors like the scene for the day, you know, then you work out the blocking of the scene, like, you know, where they're going to stand or, you know, like what would be best. And then we would try to find the shots that would work best, you know, to shoot the scene. And, you know, like Juan did the pilot, right? And then he also he did the first episode of the second season too. And he was very particular on like what the camera did. So, as you know, like when it's not him, like I would do my best to carry over his aesthetic, you know, with each director. So like, you know, it'd be my double, okay, so this is kind of what the style of the show is. Like you know, like I was the one constant. So this is kind of like what it would look like. And we would try to base the blocking and the camera, you know, around that, like a narrative basically.
I was going to ask about that because obviously, you know, with different directors on so many of some of them come back for multiple episodes over the
Yeah.
seasons, but with so many different directors, it's potentially all their different styles that you have to work with. But then, yes, you do
Mhm.
have this overall visual style that was set from early
Yeah.
on. So, how much of what you were doing with each director was sort of specific to that director versus what was specific to the overall tone and style of the show?
Yeah, like every director is, you know, like wants to bring something. So like in TV world, you know, like director's just there for they have like, you know, 5 days of prep and, you know, 8 days of shooting, right? So there's no like a normal director has like all this prep, you know, and they have a lot more involved in who the actors are. So they don't have any of that creativeness. So they want to bring their only creativeness is what's happening on set at the time. And they don't even have, and you know, to be honest with the, you know, with like Lee or, you know, Mackenzie, or they don't have, there's not much they can say to them either, right? So, you know, like because they know the show. So, you know, like they would want to bring a little bit of look or something to try to, you know, make the show have its their own little twist on it. So each, you know, like that's what, you know, like so that's what a director would try to bring, you know, to each episode is like, okay, well, look, how do we do this differently? Or how do we, you know, how do we keep the look, but how can I add my little bits to it? Or
Mm. You know, you've worked on a lot of different TV series in your
yeah,
career. So I imagine what you just said is probably true from one series to the next.
yeah,
But what
exactly.
stands out to you as being different about your experience with Halt and Catch Fire? Is there anything that was particularly unique about this set?
I mean, we definitely had like a real look to it, you know. And then like I tried to bring like we brought I by season two, you know, I tried to bring the camera to have more movement. So like we rented a crane for the whole show, and I purchased a head with Nelson. So like the camera, like if you watch, you know, the camera goes over table. So we tried to make the show um have like a feeling of like everything was in one shot, you know, like you know, so like limited coverage in, you know, like we try to make, you know, like that was what we tried to bring to the show, which is not every show you do, right? And then on this show and particularly like versus other shows, you know, I mean, I had a little bit of The Walking Dead, but you know, this show we did 4 seasons with all the same actors, and it was like a real family, like, you know, with Lee, Mackenzie, Scoot, you know, like I would hang out on the weekends with them. I went motorcycle riding with Scoot, you know, like Mackenzie came over to my house for Easter's, you know, like it was a real family feel on that show, which you don't, you know, like usually you're separated, right? And then all the actors lived in the house together. You know, they rented one, they would always, you know, Scoot, Lee, and Mackenzie would always live together in some big house, you know? And so, you know, like it was just more of a, yeah, everyone just felt like, you know, like this was their home was to be here, you know, like not, it wasn't like everyone's out of town. It's like everyone's home.
Hmm. And it's true because it was would have been a huge difference from working on The Walking Dead, where it's
Yeah.
like they're having like death parties for them every, you know, however often, you know, as characters
Yeah.
leave the show. And in this show, it was pretty stable. At least the main cast was totally stable.
Yeah, until towards the last season.
So true. So if we think about well, I know this was a while ago that this was shot, but if we
Yeah.
think about actual scenes that you worked on, let me keep it broad here to start with. So What were to you some of the more challenging scenes to shoot? What jumps to mind for you when you think about like that was not an easy day to execute?
I mean, some of the first season was some of the hardest photography. I mean, we did like, driving all, in the rain, all night, like, and it's, that's just physically hard to do. We also had, um, which in Atlanta was called Carmageddon, like where the whole city shut down. And, we worked, they had us all work until it was too late, which was normal for them, like, and no one could get home. Like, no one could get, they were wrapped at like 6 and people didn't get home till 2 in the morning or not at all, just from, that experience. We had a lot of snow and we even had, like one scene we had Mackenzie, or yeah, it was outside with Mackenzie and the girls, the little girls, the Scoots children, the children at the time. And like it was -6 degrees and they had to be in t-shirts, and like so there's a lot of interesting like weather. Usually it's like the weather is what makes the scene like feel hard on us versus like, like they're acting, because most of the scenes like they were so great. Like Lee could just spout out like 4 pages of gobbledygook. Like there's no, it's not, he's not talking to somebody, he's talking about computers. Like there's no, he's saying words that he wouldn't normally ever say. And he would, he could, so like they were, it was never really, I never really felt like we would come into a scene and be, oh man, this is like so, going to be so difficult, but because everyone was so well versed with their, like we had almost never had any problems with that ever.
I've heard tell about the snow in that first season from a few different angles in this coverage, but always from the perspective of never from the perspective of a camera operator. And I imagine that
Yeah.
presents very unique challenges to you when the temperature drops that much or when you get a lot of snow. What were some of the things that you have to do when you've got a situation like that weather-wise?
I mean, the hardest thing is, you're just trying to keep yourself warm because you're working like the crew is the actors come and go in a warming tent. We're just all stuck outside in the weather, and like you get used, I've shot in Detroit in the winter, I've shot in Michigan, I've shot in Chicago, and 12, like you get used to working and all the equipment will work, in the cold temperatures. The rain becomes a bit of a problem. Like, we had a lot of rain tower scenes. I'm trying to remember like in season one.
There was a whole hurricane episode that might be
Yeah, there's a
coming to mind
hurricane
here.
episode. Yeah, there's a hurricane episode season one. And like, the crane, like the water, it wasn't falling the way, because it's rain towers, and it was still relatively cold outside, but like it wasn't falling the way you wanted. So you're trying to like, put different like umbrella or something, so the water, doesn't fall as a square, it falls, around the camera. But yeah, that rain episode, that was a tough episode because we also had like a camera assistant, Sarah Jones, who was on the show like maybe 3 weeks prior to, like, was killed by a train on another show, like on a night that we had all rain, like, and we were next to train tracks and she was, knew the whole crew. So like that got kind of tough. But yeah, the weather, like the rain, working in the rain is the hardest aspect more than snow, or especially when we're making the rain because it's like way more rain than you would ever, it's like someone just pouring a hose on you basically.
And it's interesting because in that episode, we see certainly Gordon standing in the rain.
Yeah.
And he kind of moves between buildings on a block, and then we see a whole scene with Lee Pace outside. And Joe is fighting the rain with his flashlights, and he has a lot of
Yeah.
movement in that too. So it's like you can't. How do you set up the rain tower to make sure that they can get the amount of movement and sort of distance that they need to in that scene?
Yeah, the one on the street was like the little town, Norcross, which was down the street from our stages. And you have these giant rain towers. There's like, I think we had four of them, and like two huge water trucks. And you put one in the foreground and then like a couple in the background. That's kind of all you don't need deep background because you can't really tell about the rain. So we'd have those four, and then you have giant radar fans behind the camera to blow the wind. So if you put four, and the rain towers are, they cover at least 100 feet of area with rain each one, so you kind of like overlap them and put them, in strategic places you don't see, down the street. And that the school, that was all night, we were, all night outside, in Norcross making rain.
Yeah. Okay, so those are some of your more challenging scenes. Anything that you remember from later in the series that was particularly challenging, or does it mostly come from season one for you?
I mean, that was like some of the worst weather we had, in Georgia. And that we started that season, every year we started at a different time, like it wasn't, we're like that year we started before Thanksgiving, and then had a break and then started back up. But normally we would start like then it started in February. Then we started, then we get pushed to like the weather would kind of get, it was a nicer time of year. So it wasn't necessarily like as rough weather, each year. I think season 2, we had a little bit of cold weather, but it wasn't, it just was never as, I think, it was never as bad as it was the first season. In the first season, you're still trying to like figure out what you're doing at the show, like you don't know what you are, you don't have all the sets built yet, you don't know what the show is going to be. And so like, that's what makes it harder also, and we spent a lot more time outside season 1 than we did any other, eventually we built more sets and we spent more time on stages, than we did the first season for sure.
What is the difference for you, technically speaking, or just practically speaking, between working on a physical location and then working on a set, especially for those locations where that became sets and you can actually compare them? What's the difference for you?
I mean, for me, for one, it's, like, it's comfortable going to set, the temperature's going to be regulated, everything, like, so like that's simpler. And from a lighting perspective, like you can pull wall, like the ceilings have lights in them, right? So if you're in a practical set, the ceiling doesn't have light in it. So how like it's more difficult to bring light onto a set without if it's not on stage. And then it's, like I said, it's easy to pull a wall, or, like the dolly track can go up there, or, the camera can move. It's much easier for us to make the camera move versus like we did a episode, there's a big shot that's in someone's house, and, like you can't put dolly track because the floor is unlevel. You can't move the camera the way you want it to. So like it becomes like, it's like, it puts you in a little bit more of a hole, which could sometimes be more, it's challenging, but at the same time, like you may enjoy that more. Like, okay, these are our parameters. The camera can't move here. We can't do the shot that you wanted to do, but maybe this will be a better shot. Like you end up finding. And we did a lot of that show. We would do a lot of handheld versus, like a dolly or a crane when we were in like small locations that were more difficult. And like, just, yeah, so that would, that would help, that we wouldn't be doing that necessarily on stage, but we would do that on location because it was just easier, and we can move quicker that way.
When you think about scenes that made you most, or episodes that you were the proudest of, what comes to mind for you?
I mean, I really, like when we did, season 4, when we did, the last season, when we did Scoots, the series of death, like that was like, we had thought about that for a long time, the cameraman and I, like that was Evans Brown. He was like he did the last 2 seasons, and we put a lot of thought, like, what do we do to make this different? Like, okay, so let's do everything that we do on him is on the Steadicam, and let's make it like, and then let's make it all so it's one shot, and let's use a different lens, and let's use a flare, so like we did a lot, that last, for that season, to give it like a very specific look for that, like, and so we would just duplicate our shots. So like we would set the whole his house was on stage, and we would do the shot with Scoot, and then then we go back later and redress and it was like a modern day. Then we put Carrie in there, and Carrie's in the scene, or she's there with a baby, but she, like it's a later day and he's dressed differently. So, we would keep duplicating these shots over and over again. And I thought it turned out really well how that episode came together.
Absolutely.
And that was really visual, and like I said, we spent a lot of time thinking about it.
There were a lot of, it seemed to me that there were a lot of lighting hints, even if you go back to season 3. How early would you say you actually were planning them?
we weren't sure about what was going to happen until the season 4 came. Like we didn't know, what was going to happen until like there wasn't like a specific plan for that. But we started planning. We knew in the beginning. So I feel like it was episode 6, if I'm correct, like that it happened. Like, so I think by episode 3, Scoot's like, okay, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do that's different for me? So we're like, okay, let's, because he's like very interested in the camera, and wants to know what our thoughts are. And we're like, okay, well, maybe we do this and this. So like, I think by episode 2 or 3, we were thinking about how we were gonna shoot, that that day, or shoot his sequences of events, because like honestly, a lot of what we did with, like I would just figure out on the day with the director. Like there was literally like no real plan. Like we'd show up, the actors would, knew their thing, and we'd be like, okay, let's just do this. And like, this is how this scene works. Okay. I mean, that's like how most of it works, like some, it doesn't work that way, but a lot of times there's like literally zero plan until like 10 minutes before you are shooting, like what we're going to do for that day.
This amazes me so much because I think, fans of the show, it looks like there's a serious progression that's happening. And I would say, like, maybe the first time I really clocked it was season 3. There's an episode that sort of ends with Ryan Ray just like storming out of the mutiny office and leaving Gordon just sort of standing there, kind of reeling a little bit off balance. And you see like a very specific lighting on him that it isn't typical for what we had seen to that point. Yeah. And then even the opening of season 4, that what looks like a oneer but can't be a oneer because it's impossible. But light is kind of interesting there too, and you feel like you're in sort of a surreal like dream moment with Gordon. But then even with those lens flares that start to pick up, they start kind of smaller. And like we see an episode with him like burning his symptom logs. Yeah. And you kind of see they're just small, but they're there. And so it's interesting because it's like it felt like it built, but it doesn't sound like that was an intentional thing before season 4, episode maybe 3.
Yeah, I mean, for like when I'm talking about like his death episode, like was very specific, but like when like when we knew we did, like when he started having the symptoms, we would do, like you said, little cues to like let you know that something's gonna happen without, but they'll like very, like you said, we would do a little bit of lighting cue or add a color or, just small things, leading up to that episode.
Okay, so that's some of what made you proud. Anything else that jumps out for you for scenes that made you proud to work on?
I'm trying. It's like,
yeah.
And there was a lot, it's like a lot of my life was tied into that, and a lot of, it's hard to like, think of, specific scenes that were, because there was, a lot happened in that time frame. We saw, like the building of Mutiny, and then like the annex of Mutiny, and then like you said, like it was, there's a lot that happened. The first, I really liked Juan, like we got along really well, and a couple of things that I liked, the beginning of season 2 was a oneer, and that was me handheld, and it's a 7-minute shot that plays in the whole show. So that's the opening shot of in Mutiny. That is all one shot. And then so, like when he came back in season 4, because I don't think he worked I feel like maybe it wasn't one season he missed because he was like running for office or something, where he lives. So I think it was, so the episode, and then the first shot in season 4, like you said, was another oneer take, which we used, was Steadicam, and it was like a couple of Steadicam shot or 3, I can't remember how many Steadicam shots, and one crane shot, that we tied together, as the time, to show the time progression, whatever. And it ends, I feels like it doesn't end with them camping or it ends with them camping at the outside the campsite. Yeah, so like those were like really, really interesting and very technically difficult, to do. So like that as a camera operator like you enjoy, like, okay, well, how do we, make this work in one? And Juan's very, visual, like most, not all directors have a visual eye like Juan does. So like it makes it interesting to do stuff like that.
Mm. A couple scenes that come to mind that I'd like to ask about. There was a scene in season 4, they're shooting off rockets in a park.
Oh yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about that scene? It's very different from every other scene in the show.
That director, Michael, I mean, for one, we of course we were out of time, like we're always out of time. Like, we never like we never had enough time. Like the sun's going down. We're at the farm, like where it's not easy to shoot on, like, and Mackenzie's trailer is at that same location, it was like a farm location. So okay, we'll put Mackenzie trailers in one spot, which is, when it rained, we could never get to, like, so it's a difficult location to be at. And Michael, out of all the directors, he would do the most like coverage. Like we do more shots with him than any other director, so like some of the scenes just end up maybe a little different than, because we would do, like they would just have more coverage than we would normally have, and we didn't have any time. So I remember just running around with a camera handheld trying to shoot, get all this stuff of this footage of the rocket, like when there's no time left. And so like that kind of dictates how, what it looks like.
Yeah.
It's like your time, money, like Jeff saying, okay, you got to hurry up. You have an hour to shoot this, the sun's going down.
It is interesting the different, I mean, to get all these oneers with a director, it seems like Juan did a lot of oneers, and then to go from
Yeah.
that to what Michael was doing and have a lot of these different shots. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you have to work really hard to keep the style of the show consistent with all those different elements.
Yeah. Michael was one of the only, like, I would say like Michael, Juan, and I'm trying to remember another, like, there was only a couple directors that had very specific visual, like would come up with something different than what we would normally do, right? Like, or come up with, Juan had a style that he dictated for the show, right? But then like, Michael would want to do more coverage, or he'd have very specific shots. Not a lot of directors did. Kimberly Pierce had like an opening shot, we did all on GoPros, so like she had one or two shots, and she would have a different visual style, but she would go with our style of the show, for shooting it, and then so a lot of, and then so other than that, there weren't. And then Ed, God, I can't remember Ed's. He did see an episode in season 1 who had a very specific visual style, and God, what is his last name? But in every shot we did with Ed was extremely specific. Like he would put his hand in front of the camera if it wasn't, like if he didn't think the shot was good at the time. It's like we'd only shoot one camera, and we never shot two cameras with Ed. He'd like, and literally he's like, okay, I don't want the shot now. So he put his hand in front of camera, and he was the only one that really gave, like, he'd give the actors kind of a hard time. It was pretty fun, because he was like older and very established, and didn't really care what anyone told him to do. So, but those were like the only 3 directors that had like that really brought a visual style, between Ed and
Ed Bianchi.
Michael. Yeah, Ed Bianchi. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
They would, they would break away a little bit from, what we would normally do. They
Mm-hmm.
still would incorporate it, but they would break away because, a lot of like Trisha, Brock directed a bunch, and Daisy, and Trisha's was the episode that we did where Gordon dies. So she was very much on our page with the visual style of the show, and like like I had done Walking Dead with Trisha, and I like I know, like, so these directors I worked 4 seasons with, so it was like almost like secondhand of like what we were doing with the camera, versus like someone coming in like dictating. And then like you said, a lot of the directors were the same, so they would kind of walk in and know what was happening, like, okay, this is what the show is. Glenn's gonna, we're gonna tell him what, dictate what we're gonna figure out what we're gonna do. And then so it was like a comfortable in that way.
So this is a question that I've been thinking about a lot as I've been covering. Well, as I covered season 2, there was an episode where there was a Nerf dart battle at the Mutiny House.
Yeah.
And we saw a number of different types of shots in that episode, but there was one camera angle that looked like it was a GoPro on Mackenzie's head.
Yeah.
And that I had thought, so you'll have to clarify this for me. I had thought that like an actor can't can't operate a camera. I'd heard that from another show. And so when I saw this, I got confused. So what was that on set, and what kind of possibilities are there when it comes to that?
I mean, people are putting cameras on actors forever, like it's just part, like, you put it on the end of their gun, you can put it on, their head, you can put it, and stuntmen wear cameras and they're not, like, so it's 100%, we've been doing it forever, putting cameras on actors. Like it's just part of like so like that's how we did it,
Mm-hmm. To
and
be
like
fair, the
also,
show that I'm thinking of was from like late 90s, early 2000s. So
really?
there
Well,
was
do you
a specific
remember
thing.
Requiem for a Dream?
Yeah.
So that was one of the first shows that mounted the camera to, so when they walk like that, like the camera was mounted to them. And like that's why it looked like, the whole world moved with them. That was the first time that had been done, like where you mount a camera to look at them, right? But and then on like other shows, like before that, because it was film, right? There weren't GoPros, right? Like I was a camera assistant in the 90s. We didn't have GoPro. We had like little film cameras, like IMOs. They're about this big. And you'd put it on a stuntman and he'd wear a helmet. So like, like that would be the camera, but now that with GoPro, you can put them, we put them wherever. You can put them on actors. You can, it's so much easier now.
Mm. You've touched on this a little bit in terms of at least Gordon, but given that you want to have some consistency between all of the episodes of this show, are there any particular techniques or styles that were used consistently that you knew you needed to do for this show across the board, or for specific characters or locations?
Yeah, like, the second season of the show, like everything in Mutiny was handheld. Like we never, everything inside the house, not by season 3 when they went to the building, but was in the house, everything was handheld. I'm trying to think of what other styles. What else did you ask?
Also, like for characters, were there particular
Oh
styles that were
yeah.
used that were different from other characters?
There weren't, not necessarily different characters. We did a thing though with the overs, which like, when you do it over someone's shoulder, right? You
Mhm.
put a camera and then you see somebody. We had set up a style with Juan where you put them all very close and you leave a bunch of empty space. Like you probably never even noticed it, but if you look for it now, you'll notice that like all the actors are very close when you're shooting over someone's shoulder to the other person talking to them, and there's like almost no space there, and then all the space is on the like the left or right edge of frame. Like there's nothing there except the background. And like that was a style choice you made with Juan had made, when in prep with Jeff when they were like in Texas thinking of doing the show there, like that's where um he had made, Juan had made that style choice. And that's the one thing that carried over from director to season to DP. Like that style choice never changed, like, and I made sure that, we kept that one look, and that lasted the whole show. And like
It's
I
a
said,
really
Gordon,
interesting one to spot.
yeah,
Nobody's mentioned that. Is the intention behind that to create like an intimacy in the scene? Or, I mean, I know also stuff like Dutch angles were used, but that doesn't seem like a thing that's meant to make you feel uncomfortable. What was there a thought on what
we
the
were just
intention was?
bringing, it was to bring that, it's like you bringing them together, like, and then, like in an uncomfortable way, right? Like it's kind of uncomfortably close, and then and there's just like a bunch of space, like, negative space on one side of the frame. It's not normal, right? Like it's not something you see normally when you watch the show. And, like I said, almost nobody, you don't even notice it. You don't even notice that it's happening.
That'll be a fun thing for us to go back and look for. It sounds like it happened a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Dutch angles, like, I mean, it was mostly just on Juan's episodes because it gets too tedious to be constantly doing it. And it was like we would find the Dutch angles was we would find a straight line in where we'd find a straight line somewhere and then match to that straight line. And even though the whole world would be kind of off kilter, there's something in the background that's straight. So that was like our intention on, that was like Juan's intention. It's like something's just a little off, you know, it looks like it's straight, but something's a little off. That was like, you know, his full intention. Like I said, but it gets too hard to, you know, you just don't have time, especially when the camera's moving, you know, and we end up making the camera move by season 2, and then 3 and 4, the camera's always moving, you know, and then by like we started using a thing called the skater scope in season 3 when Evans came, and it's like a periscope, you know, with the lens that would drop down, and you could get really low, or, you know, and we put it on a crane, and you can do very intricate, extremely tricky shots. And like that was like, so then like other things kind of went out the window to, you know, to accommodate this like interesting look with the camera always moving.
That's interesting. So you can get the camera really low starting in season 3. Are there
Yeah.
any scenes that come to mind for you where that was something really like a specific style that you used for a scene? I'm trying to think if there's anything that was like so shot, because I'm guessing that means you're shooting up.
Yeah, you could be shooting up, or, you know, shooting over, like the camera can, like, you can be low over a tape, like you can scrape right over a table or the kitchen countertops, or, you know, because like we, you know, wherever we went, the camera could just, you know, you can put it in corners, you know, without moving a whole bunch of walls, or, you know, there's just a lot of interesting things we could do with that little, you know, with that camera. And Evan was really, he was like you know, like when he came, he was interested in, let's do whatever we can to make the show look interesting, you know. So like we even had these giant mirrors that could be see-through, that we would just bring in and stick halfway in the frame, you know, like, so then like half the frame has this weird mirror look through it, you know, and but you can't necessarily, you just think you're looking through glass. Or we did a lot, like he was really open to experimentation, which we had, you know, and he started in season 3.
As you say that, I might be making reference to this in a different way than what you just meant it, but we see a lot of scenes in this show. So far in my rewatch, people will find out how far ahead I am and I say this,
Yeah.
but so right now I'm at sort of towards the end of season 2. When this
Yeah.
comes out, I'll probably be a lot further ahead. But even up until this point, there have been a lot of scenes where we see characters through mirrors.
Yeah.
So when you're setting up for that, when you're operating camera for that, does that change things much for you? How does that change things for you if you're shooting kind of a reflection plus, plus the people in the scene versus just shooting the people in the scene?
I mean, it's just like it's just a camera trick that we've been doing forever. And like, you know, that was one thing, you know, Juan always like to see them in reflection, you know, it's like something we did a lot of. And if you just stand to one side, they can't look, you know, for them to look at themselves, they have to look at the camera. It's real, you know, they can't look at themselves. So like, it's a little bit confusing for them, you know, like they're not, like there's a scene with, I think, Mackenzie and Carrie in the bathroom, right? I think that's season 2, I feel like. And we played the whole scene, you know, like we played the whole scene in the mirror. Like we almost, I think maybe we did one shot, you know, where she goes into the office and she meets Mackenzie for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And um you know, they can't look at each other, right? They when they look in the mirror, they're looking, you know, not at the other actor. So like it's a little bit harder for them, and for us it's, you know, you just go off to one side, and you can totally see, you know, like you don't see the camera but you can see them. But for them it's a lot more, like I said, it's more because they're not looking at each other, and they're not looking at themselves, even though it looks like they're looking at themselves and looking at each other. They have to look at like a mark, or you know, or the camera.
It's also interesting. So you worked with so many different people on this show. Who is there anybody you want to acknowledge from the cast or crew? Who are the unsung heroes that you worked with on a regular basis, but we may or may not know their names?
Yeah, I mean, Josh Gilbert was a second assistant from season 1, and he made it to focus puller, and he's the only camera department person that made it all the way through. You know, like we dragged him out, you know, like the camera department's changed in almost every year until, you know, I maintained, and then Josh maintained, you know, and he ended up being the camera focus puller. So like he made it the whole time. I'm trying to think of, like, I don't know who else you've had on the show. You know, I haven't seen all the people who've been on, but I mean, there were a lot of people really enjoyed the show. So like working on the show. So like there were so many people that were happy to be there. You know, like we had a great first AD in Townsend Wells, and you know, Iron Kirkendall was the second AD, and you know, like we had a lot of great people who were just like, you know, because the show was so enjoyable that really tried to make it, you know, great. It's hard to
Mm.
like necessarily specify like specific people. I'm trying to think.
Yeah,
I,
well, that's great so far, though. I
yeah,
mean,
I don't know.
I mean, there are certain names every fan knows, right? And then
Yeah,
there are all these people, there's so many people who worked on this show. And, you know,
yeah,
I'm finding that the level of detail that every department went into was extremely high. And so, you know, when you do a deep dive, there's a lot to unpack, and there's always more under the surface because every department was bringing all this thought and intention to what they were
yeah,
doing. So, you know,
there
it
were.
must be inspiring to work with all that on show on set.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I don't know if you've talked to Melissa, but she was like the producer, you know, and she really like brought, you know, she was there the whole time. She had, you know, a baby, you know, she had a child, you know, it was like there was a lot going on with her, and she, you know, she really kept the show together, you know, as much as she could, you know. And I think, you know, she brought the directors, she, you know, and I think she had a lot to do. I mean, she may not be unsung because, you know, everyone, you know, like she's got a producer credit on the show, but she really was the one that kept everything together.
Mhm. So, in terms of just sort of closing thoughts with this, you know, this show, I mean, I think one of the reasons I love it is that the artistry is there. And, you know, especially as you get into seasons 3 and 4, the camera work and the artistry just seems to get better and better every season. What do you want us to know? Just big picture. What do you want to make sure fans know about this show?
I just think that, you know, like I said, it was a real family, you know, like you really felt like a family, like in the actors, like a lot of shows, you know, like no one knows, the actors knew everyone, you know, like we would all go out together. We would, you know, like the whole crew, you know, like it was just like it was, you know, from Jeff to, you know, who's the producer, Melissa and Steph, and then, you know, the core four actors, you know, even like Toby, and you know, everyone was just so, there was no attitudes. No one ever had an attitude. You know, everyone came in prepared. Everyone, you know, really wanted to be there. It wasn't a show where people were, you know, like, I'm not coming back this season because they're not paying me. Like there was none of that on the show at all. Like everyone was really like enjoyed what they were doing, and we felt like we were making a good show. Like, you know, the Chris's, or you know, like were like you know, they're from the top, and you know, they you know, they grew up on that show, the two Chris's, and you know, they really made it look, you know, they really wrote, you know, amazing scripts, and we just, you know, we all just really wanted to make the show together.
Mm. Is there, let's see, it's been a weird stretch of time for your industry, but is there anything that you're working on now that you can talk about, or anything that you've worked on since Halt and Catch Fire that you want people to go see?
I mean, I mean, that was, you know, it's like I couldn't say everything I've worked on. You know, it's been a lot. Currently, I'm working on the new Naked Gun movie, you know, with which is hilarious. You know, we had Pam Anderson, you know, for the first time yesterday, and you know, Liam Neeson. So, you know, that it's been pretty amazing. You know, like it's been great. You know, we obviously everyone had a sabbatical, but we are, you know, and it's slowly coming back. But you know, so I'm happy to be working.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much for taking all this time to talk with me about this show. I've learned a lot from all the things that you said. The type of information you gave is different from what everybody else has given so far because of the nature of your role. So, you know, thank you so
Yeah,
much for doing this.
great, great. Yeah, it was nice talking to you.
Yeah. And to everybody who's watching this, thank you for watching, and go out there and watch Halt and Catch Fire. Bye, everybody.
All right, bye.